Hello everyone, this is Nathaniel Rutherford, the managing editor of RocketTopInsider.com. Giving you a little bit of a heads up here at the start of this episode. We had so many great questions from you guys who listened to the podcast, and it's also some news that kind of happened in the middle of the podcast, that our podcast actually with Brandon Martin here of VR2 went for just over an hour. So instead of making you all sit there and listen to an hour and all at a time, decided to go ahead and break it up into two different podcasts because we kind of had a nice place to split it there down the middle. The first half, this first edition of the podcast you're listening to right here, is basically all our questions that we were asked about 2021 prospects, with a few other news and notes we threw in there about a couple of the prospects that weren't asked about. And the second part that'll come out a little later this week, probably a day after this one comes out, I'd say. We're basically all about 2022 prospects, and we had one other one about a 21 prospects. So be on the lookout for the second part coming out, but this is part one of our Mailbag edition of the RTI Recruiting Podcast. And again, thank you all so much for all the questions. We had a ton, and Brandon and I had a fun time recording this. So without further ado, here is part one of the RTI Recruiting Podcast Mailbag edition. Hello everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the RTI Recruiting Podcast. I am Nathaniel Rutherford, the managing editor of RocketTopInsider.com, and I am joined for this episode by our special guest at VR2, Brandon Martin. I appreciate you joining me for this podcast. Brandon went ahead and sent out some questions on Twitter for our followers at the RTI Recruiting Twitter account to send us in some questions for this week's episode. Turned into a mailbag episode. There's not, there's some stuff we'll touch on that didn't get covered from listener questions that are still kind of worth pointing out, but there are some very good questions in here, so let's get right to it. Brandon, our first one, actually our first couple probably, will come here from Get Bent Vol, a avid listener to the show and a guy who I've talked with before, so appreciate you, Get Bent Vol, for sending in some questions. So here's a few. We'll address this one first. Brandon, where does Tennessee stand with Deion Colzie? For those of you who may not know or who may have forgotten, because he hasn't been mentioned with Tennessee in a little bit until recently, Deion Colzie is a highly rated wide receiver out of Athens, Georgia, plays for Athens Academy, which is the same high school that Tennessee signee in the 2020 class, Leneath Whitehead, played for. 6'4", about 195 on 247 Sports. The composite rankings have him as the number 66 overall player, number 9 wide receiver, number 7 player in the state of Georgia, holds offers from Alabama, Georgia, Auburn, Penn State. He was at one point committed to Notre Dame. We and I were talking about that before we hit record here on the podcast, Brandon. Committed to Notre Dame, and then he decommitted from them. He committed October 12th of last year and then decommitted in March of this year. We were talking about it before we hit record. He's always been kind of high on Tennessee. I believe Tennessee was his first offer, if they weren't there, at least his first major offer back in May of 2018. Tennessee seems like they've gotten they've always kind of been in the mix for him, but it seems like you're hearing a little bit more buzz with Tennessee on Colzie. So in your opinion, Brandon, where does Tennessee stand with this really highly rated receiver?
I had an opportunity to watch Deion play early last season. I had gone down to watch he and Leneath play. Leneath got hurt at the end of the first half of that game, but I got to watch Deion. I was really impressed. Big body wide receiver. His routes are solid, especially for that size. Good speed for his size. Outstanding hands. Great leaper. Really the total package as a wide receiver. He's an impact player probably on day one on an SEC roster. There's a reason he's got offers from everywhere all over the country. High football IQ, high IQ period, and a well-spoken young man. I had the opportunity to interview him after the game. And as we were talking then, the two teams that he brought up as his top two at the time, and this has been a long time ago, but the two teams he brought up as his top two teams were Tennessee and Notre Dame. And those were the two teams he said he heard from the most, he had the best relationship with, and that had been on him for the longest. And he talked about how long Tennessee had been on him and how consistently Tennessee had been on him. And I really felt like Tennessee had a good shot in that recruitment. And so I was disappointed and discouraged when he committed to Notre Dame earlier, or when he committed to Notre Dame later in that season. I was a bit discouraged just because I was so high on him. He's such a good player, and I had really hoped Tennessee would be able to get him. And I've got to give Matt credit here. His words were, "Yeah, man, don't worry about it. wide receivers tend to commit early to Notre Dame until they don't. And I sort of laughed and said, what does that mean? He said, just wait and see. And then sure enough, Deion winds up opening his recruitment back up, decommitting from Notre Dame. And at the time, everybody felt like that was because Georgia had gotten involved. But recently, Georgia's picked up a couple wide receivers. Admai Mitchell, that we have talked about on the podcast several times, that I've also had the chance to see, that I also think very highly of, at Cane Ridge, who had originally committed to Ole Miss, has flipped to Georgia. And Georgia's picking up steam and kind of picking up predictions right now. A lot of buzz around them for another wide receiver right now pretty recently, and that would probably mean they're done at receiver. And it sort of feels like they realize, maybe they missed the boat on Deion. Georgia was the other big contender there. Tennessee has been really consistent with Deion. They have been on him early. They've been on him a long time. He likes the program. He likes the coaches. He likes the way things are going. And he and Laneith Whitehead are close. They weren't just teammates. They were friends. From what I understand, they're pretty good friends. And Laneith has been very vocal about saying he wants to get his teammate up there, and that he has been trying to recruit Deion to Tennessee. He's talked about that. I think Tennessee's got a good chance of actually pulling this off. I know there's some other national powers in there, but this feels like the recruitment that we have seen Jeremy Pruitt and his staff win on. It feels kind of like Darnell Wright to me. That really highly rated prospect. You knew Tennessee was in the picture. Just everybody they bring up other schools, and kind of dismiss Tennessee, even though they have been, when you talk to the kid, they're consistently there. From the beginning to the end, they're consistent. They're active with the kids like them. Henry To'oTo'o is another one that this kind of reminds me of. This is the kind of recruitment, these long recruitments where Tennessee gets on guys early, values them highly, and this staff is able to get involved in the front end. And I keep saying consistent, but when this Tennessee staff really wants a kid, consistency is what you see. They don't back off. They're always there. And they tend to win those. They have tended to win those if the players have really had interest in the school. And I'm from talking to Deion, I believe he does. I think Tennessee's actually going to get this done. I think Laneith plays a big part. I think need for Tennessee plays a big part. But I think the consistency and the length that the staff has worked this will play a part as well. I actually think they're going to pull this one off.
That'd be huge. Tennessee already has a pretty good crop of receivers committed to them in this class, and adding Deion Colzie to that group would be huge. Tennessee obviously pulled in a really good receiver haul in the 2020 class, and like I said, 21 they already have a few other guys committed. Jordan Mosley, the kid who I suddenly just forgot his name, who plays in Tennessee. Walker Merrill is committed. Rock Taylor, who I think is a very underrated player, very physical, very good player, who's committed to Tennessee. You look at Colzie, he's a guy who is, like I said, 6'4", about 195, very lengthy, athletic guy. He tests really well in combine settings. I think he ran like a 4.5 40 last year, so I'm assuming that's about what he has this year, if not a little bit faster. He is also a state medalist in the high jump, so he can leap pretty well as well.
And that translates to the football field. I've seen it firsthand. That translates to the football field.
Yep. So he's a big target. He's a guy that if Tennessee lands, that it would be a huge addition to Tennessee's class, and it would solidify the receiving core in this group as, again, a back-to-back year, assuming Tennessee signs everyone who's still committed, back-to-back years of Tennessee bringing in some really talented receivers, and T. Martin really, putting in that work to recruit his position really well. Get Bentonville also asked about Tennessee's chances of landing Diego Pounds. We had another person, and Guerin, I apologize, I'm pronouncing your last name incorrectly, said that they saw someone posted about things have gone cold with Diego Pounds, and he truth this claim and why. Brandon, I've actually heard kind of the opposite. I've not seen anything that would indicate that things have gone cold with Diego Pounds. In fact, we'll mention another offensive lineman here after we talk about Pounds for a second, but I think Tennessee's actually in a pretty good spot with Diego Pounds, and you and I have talked. We don't have to talk extensively about this because we've talked about him before on podcasts, but we both are big fans of Pounds, and we both think Tennessee is sitting right there with a lot of teams that are really going after him. But we think Tennessee's probably in a pretty good spot. Don't know if there's anything imminent from him, but from last thing I've heard about Pounds is that Tennessee is they're liking where they're sitting right now.
Everything that I've heard with Pounds makes me feel like Tennessee is a pretty clear front runner. Things sort of slowed down for Tennessee. I think things sort of slowed down for everyone. And Pounds he's also had a pretty quiet recruitment period. He doesn't post a whole lot of stuff on Twitter. He's not a real vocal, out there kid talking about what's going on or making a big deal about announcements. Or he's pretty low key, and so he's pretty quiet. This is another one though that Tennessee they got involved quietly. They've stayed involved. They have been consistent with him. I think they have got to feel like they're in a good spot with him. To me, Diego Pounds is absolutely a take in this class. Pounds is a kid whose ranking across the board I expect to see go up. I love his technique. I love his frame. I love his athletic ability. I love his football IQ. I love his IQ, period. I love him in the run game. And I think he's an early impact SEC tackle if you need him to be. I really think he has flown under the radar. Tennessee could wind up being done at least offensive tackle, and maybe done on the offensive line unless they are able to land Amarius Mims or decide they want an interior lineman. But they could be done on the offensive line with Pounds and another player we're going to talk about. I think Tennessee's in a good spot here. I've not heard anything to make me think that the Vols are out of this one.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything either that would indicate things have kind of gone cold, unless, like you said, things have maybe just kind of gone cold for everyone with Pounds, because he's not, I don't think he's in a rush to make a commitment. I don't think a lot of kids right now are in a too big of a rush to make a commitment. But speaking of offensive line and someone who could be committing soon and, well, is committing soon according to himself, another one we've talked about on this podcast extensively before is William Parker, an in-state prospect who, just like Pounds, is a 3-star, but has really a 4-star offer list of a ton of SEC schools, a lot of Power 5 schools. William Parker announced, I believe it was on Monday, that he's going to be committing on September 4th, in his senior season, kind of right at the beginning of that, to kind of, I think, get that out of the way, and so he can focus on his senior year, assuming, obviously that everything goes according to plan for high school football. But Brandon, really quickly for William Parker here, I feel like Alabama's gotten involved there, but with Alabama snagging a huge offensive line haul over the weekend, and obviously I think that they're still going to take maybe one or two more, but Alabama has gotten involved there with Parker. But I still feel like, in the same vein that you say with Pounds, I think Tennessee is probably the front runner for Parker right now.
I think Tennessee's in the driver's seat of this one. I think Tennessee really likes Parker's versatility. This is a guy who, and we've talked a little bit about this, who can help you on the offensive line. He can help you on the defensive line. Depending on how a few other commitments go, Tennessee may wind up needing help on the defensive line and liking where they're at on the offensive line. William Parker's a guy you can slide over, and he can play that nose tackle spot that Tennessee still needs at least one more player to fill. I really like him as a right tackle. I would love to see him get I'd love to see him get a redshirt year. I think he could come in and play early. I think with a redshirt year, he can come in and thrive. I think he needs that 1 year to polish technique, get the finer things down. I really like him as a right tackle. Diego Pounds and William Parker, to me, are both guys that are rated as 3-stars right now. And you put on the tape and you look at the offer list, and they're both you're talking about 4-star talents looking at these two guys. And as someone who covers this Tennessee team, and as someone who really enjoys the offensive line and is is a firm believer that the recruiting that Jeremy Pruitt and his staff have done on the offensive and defensive lines have led to the turnaround we've seen in this program. I would be thrilled with Diego Pounds and William Parker as the two big tackles in this class. Of course, if you can get Amarius Mims, you take him. But if you can get Pounds and Parker, I'm really happy. Those two young men can play.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. They may not have the star power of Amarius Mims or star power of some other guys Tennessee had been pursuing last class or this current cycle, but I really like the upside potential what both Pounds and Parker bring, and especially watching Pounds' film and his physicality and his burst off the ball. And I mean, we've gone into detail before on the podcast, so I don't want to go too much into it again here. But needless to say, Brandon, you and I both are big fans of Pounds and Parker. You know more offensive line work than I do, so I'll take your word over what I see on film. Even I, someone who isn't as nuanced in the film of offensive linemen, I can tell they have really good film. So I think getting those two would be good for Tennessee, and I would trust Will Friend to be able to develop them at their time at Tennessee. The last question for Get Mentvall here before we move on to a couple questions. Actually, we'll touch on one other 21 prospect, and then we'll get to a couple questions about 2022 kids. Get Mentvall asked, he's hearing that Trinity Bell is getting up near 280 pounds and is working hard to add even more weight. So is that going to force Bell onto the defensive line for this 21 class? And Brandon, I think that move, I think we kind of saw it coming. I don't remember if we talked about it when Tennessee picked up another tight end commit in this cycle. But Tennessee now, in their class, they hold multiple tight end commitments, and Bell can project and could play tight end. But you have Hudson Wolf, you have Miles Campbell, who are going to play tight end, and I think Tennessee, if they got two kind of true tight end prospects in this cycle, I think you were going to see Bell move to the defensive line moving forward, just because he already has that huge 6'7" body and was already about 250 or so coming off his junior season. If the rumors are true that he is up to about 280 and still working to put on weight, I don't see how you don't have Bell move to the defensive line. I think there's a bigger need for him there than there would be for tight end for him in this cycle.
Trinity Bell was a really impressive tight end on film. I liked his tight end film a lot, and Tennessee pretty desperately needed two tight ends. They absolutely had to sign two tight ends in this class. But as badly as you needed two tight ends, I think it was kind of a hard cap at two. You had to get two, but you really only needed two. And Bell was a guy that could fill that role, and he had other options. I liked him as a tight end. I like his tight end film. That size is impressive. He's got good hands and good athleticism, especially at 6'8" and 250. He ticks all the boxes as a tight end. But you and I talked about this, I think maybe not on a podcast, but before we recorded one. I've always liked his defensive film a little bit better. He has that length. He has a nice burst for that size. Again, 6'8" and can run. And when you translate that to those long arms and the first step that he's got playing as a defensive end, he's a load and he's a problem. He is difficult to deal with. He's very quick in a short area. He has good top end speed. He can work inside, outside. He uses his hands and those arms well. And the more he focuses on that and the more he develops that, the better he's going to be. In Tennessee's 3-4 scheme, if you can put him at an end at 280, 290, I think you may start really sacrificing some of his athleticism if you push him much more than that. But 280, 290, you're up in the kind of weight class that Jeremy Pruitt has liked putting 3-4 defensive ends on the field in his time at Tennessee. He's long, he's tall, he's got arms that are going to be a problem in the passing lane. He's got good strength. He's got enough quickness to rush the passer as a 3-4 end, which is an added bonus because it's not necessarily something you look for from those guys. And Tennessee needs help on the defensive line in this class. They have got to sign multiple defensive linemen, and Bell's a really good athlete with a really good body and a high ceiling. I like the move to him to defensive end. We talked about this when Tennessee signed when Tennessee got the commitment from Hudson Wolf. With Miles Campbell and Hudson Wolf, you made two positions better that day because you were able to take Wolf and help upgrade your tight end position and move Bell to your defensive line and help upgrade there.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited to see Bell on the defensive line because I do think he does go there, like you said, since he got the commit from Hudson Wolf. We talked about getting better at two positions because Bell's just, he's the term freak athlete kind of gets thrown out a little bit more than I think it should. But I mean, when you're 6'7" and 270 or 280, wherever he is now, I mean, that is gigantic, and he moves really well for his size. Go watch his film. If you can play tight end at that height and weight and play defensive end or defensive line at that height and weight, you're an athletic kid. I mean, Shai Tuttle, I hated his injuries and stuff at Tennessee, for one, because I don't wish that on any player, but also because he was a very gifted, athletic defensive lineman coming out of high school. He was a guy who handled running back duties at the goal line for his high school before he came to Tennessee. He was a definitive 5-star in my opinion, and I wish the injuries hadn't happened for him, so he could have lived up to that more at Tennessee. But I'm a huge fan of these athletic defensive linemen who can play on the offense as well, and I'm a big believer that Trinity Bell is an underrated prospect too. I think a handful of the guys Tennessee has committed to them from the state of Alabama in this cycle are fairly underrated, because I think he is, and I think Rock Taylor is very underrated as well, and I'm excited to see what both those guys can develop into once they come to Tennessee and they get coaching and they get taught by what I think is a pretty competent coaching staff on every level that Tennessee has right now. One more thing before we return back to the questions here. And Brandon, we were talking before we record, we wanted to bring up a player who is a big Tennessee target who will be announcing his commitment in a week, and that is Payton Page. Obviously had a finalist list of Tennessee, Clemson, and North Carolina. North Carolina being the in-state team. He plays over at Dudley High School in Greensboro, North Carolina. 4-star defensive tackle who's an absolutely massive human being at 6'4". I think he's listed at 360 on 247, but I think he's back down to about 335 or so. Either way, that's a humongous human who is a space eater and moves really well on the interior of the defensive line. Committing July 28th. I don't know that he's announced the time necessarily, but I know he's committing on July 28th. Brandon, it seems like right now, as of the recording of this podcast, that the consensus, but the kind of scuttlebutt on him is that Clemson seems to be the team, and we talked about it, I think, maybe even the last podcast we did together, that if Clemson wants him, Clemson's probably the school he's going to go to, but it's a question of whether or not Clemson thinks he's a take at this point in time, and if he's not, does he end up at Tennessee, or does he go to North Carolina, who's been pushing really hard for him and have been trying to sell him on the whole, you're not that far from home. If you go to UNC McMahon Tar Heel, you can go home on a weekend and it not be a big deal. Whereas I know Dudley's not that far from Knoxville either. But if he doesn't go to Clemson, because I think if Clemson wants him, that's where he's going to go. But if he doesn't, in your opinion, what does that mean about, or what does that mean for Tennessee?
I think it's very much a case of, if Clemson wants Payton Page, he's going to be a Clemson Tiger. If they tell him they want him, if they tell him they are going to take his commitment, then he is going to Clemson. I think the issue is not with Clemson looking at Page and going, is he a take from a talent standpoint? And we talked about this a bit. I think it's Clemson looking and going, is he a take as a fit in our defense? He's a good player, but he doesn't necessarily fit what Clemson does on defense. Matter of fact, doesn't really fit what Clemson does on defense at all in their defensive front. Mm-hmm. They have talked with him about, is he a guard? Is he a defensive tackle? There have been concerns with Clemson about his weight. That has been less with Tennessee because Tennessee sees him as a nose tackle. He is an ideal fit, factory made, to play that nose tackle position in Tennessee's defense, be the anchor of the defense, and for all the linebackers and everybody else gets credit. In a 3-4 defense, you have to have that nose tackle. If your nose tackle is in place and is good, the rest of the defense is built around them. If they're not playing, or you're having to hide that player, or you don't have someone who can fill that role well, the entire defense suffers. You have to have that role filled. And Page fills it perfectly for Tennessee. He fits into their defense ideally. If Clemson wants him, he's going to go to Clemson. If Clemson doesn't, or Clemson passes, or they're not sure, I think it's probably Tennessee. North Carolina's going to make it tough. It's going to be hard to get him out of the state with as well as Mack Brown has done. But if he decides not to go to Clemson, I really like Tennessee's chances there.
It'll be interesting to see. We're a week away. It's, to me, it's a thing where I don't know that. I don't think any of the crystal balls and stuff should be paid attention to just yet. I don't think there's been any new ones that have come in a while. Actually, I'm scrolling through them right now. The most recent one was back in early June. So it's been well over a month, about a month and a half, since there's been a crystal ball come in for him. And that one was from Anna Hickey of Clemson 247, which she does a pretty good job of kind of predicting accurately what's going to happen. But that was back in June 3rd. I mean, things have changed between now and then, and things could change between now and a week from now when he makes his announcement. So he'd be another, again, huge addition to Tennessee's 2021 class. And I agree with you, Brandon. I think he fits better into what Tennessee does defensively than what Clemson does defensively. But I also can't fault a kid for wanting to go to Clemson at the same time. And actually, Brandon, as we're recording this, a little bit of breaking news here. Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, who is a big Tennessee target, just announced his top 6 schools. So he's at one point had a list of finalists or list of top schools, and then was going to announce and then changed it. But now he's got another list of top 6 schools. So we'll talk about this briefly. Tennessee makes the cut along with Alabama, Georgia, Virginia Tech, South Carolina, and North Carolina. So a big-time Tennessee target along the defensive line. Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins lists Tennessee as one of his top 6. What is your immediate reaction to that, Brandon, here as we're kind of reacting to it live as we're recording the podcast?
I like Tennessee's chances with Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins. Alabama being involved there is going to make that a challenge. South Carolina has been in that mix for a while, but, and I'm sorry to have to say this way, in that instance, Tennessee's recruiting against Tracy Rocker at South Carolina, and if we've learned one thing over the last few years, it's that Rocker has a difficult time keeping in-state talent at home in his position group, and I think the uncertainty about Will Muschamp's job security at South Carolina going into this season is also going to play against the Gamecocks there. North Carolina is another one. When you start seeing them get involved, he's at least not Ingram-Dawkins is at least not a North Carolina kid. So maybe Mack Brown's voodoo magic stops at the state line. I don't know, but with the tear that they have been on and the way they have recruited, they're going to be a factor there. Again, we mentioned Alabama. Alabama is always going to be, if Alabama is serious in a recruitment, they are always a threat. But Tennessee has shown in the last 2 recruiting cycles, they have the ability to go head-to-head with Alabama and get who they want. Matter of fact, the last 3 recruiting cycles, they've been able to do that. You don't get everybody, but they have had the ability to recruit head-to-head against Alabama for guys that both programs badly wanted, and Tennessee has won on guys that have been impact players. I've felt for a while like Tennessee is probably a slight leader for Ingram-Dawkins. I don't think it's enough to feel real confident or make any big brash predictions about, but I do feel like Tennessee maybe has a slight edge in that one. But this one's going to be a fight until the day that he decides to announce. Ingram-Dawkins is a very good player. If he gets to play a senior season, I think you're going to see his stock continue to rise, provided he stays healthy. I like what he does. He's so valuable because he's a defensive lineman that fits into every scheme. If you play in a 4-3, you can kick him inside to tackle. He can play either of your defensive tackle positions. In a 3-4, he's athletic enough that you can put him out at defensive end, or by the end of his career, you could probably put enough muscle and weight on him to bump him inside and let him play nose too. There are not a lot of those guys with a combination of size, strength, and athleticism that can play every position in every front. So I think he's a slight. I would call Tennessee a slight leader right there, but this one's going to be a fight. Going to be a very serious fight.
Yeah, absolutely. But he again, we just talked about Payton Page being a huge target for Tennessee. Dawkins is another big guy, and I agree with everything you just said about his type of play and his style that he is. I like him a lot. I think he's is he the one that I've remember seeing videos of on Twitter of him just leaping out of the pool? Is that who I'm thinking of?
One of them, yes.
Yeah.
And
there's another one too that did that.
A man his size is not supposed to be able to do that.
Yeah. He is listed at, what is he? Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins. He is 6'5", 300 pounds. Yeah, a 6'5", 300 pound human being should not be able to stand in at least waist deep pool water. Actually, almost chest deep, almost for him, and just leaping out of it and leaping onto
the side.
Leaping perfectly, just standing on the side. I mean, he is a gifted athletic human being. Yeah, so that was kind of as we're recording this, so a little kind of live. I guess not live, you're all listening to it recorded, but a little reaction there from us as Dawkins includes Tennessee in his top 6. We'll have an article about that at RockyTopInsider.com, and I'm sure you guys will at VR2 as well, which I didn't get to plug you guys at the beginning of the show, but they're part of the Sports Illustrated family, so be sure and check them out as well. They're VR2 _ on Twitter. Check it out. I'm sure Matt Ray or Brandon, either one, or someone else on the team will have a piece up about Tennessee making the cut for Ingram-Dawkins there. And that will do it for part 1 of the RTI Recruiting Podcast Mailbag Edition. Be sure to tune in to part 2 later this week. Again, appreciate all of you who asked questions, and we'll get to all the 2022 prospect questions and one about a 21 prospect in the second part of the Mailbag Podcast. So be sure to look out for that. And again, thank you all for listening.